Kirsten, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you doing?
I'm well, Ben. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. Thank you for joining me on episode 101, the first
Yeah,
one with a new microphone. So thank you for bearing with me. Hopefully, the production quality, at least my end, is a lot better than it has been. But
sounds
anyway,
good.
this
Yeah, thanks for having
episode's
me.
this episode's all about you. So I want to sort of dive straight in, really.
Okay.
Um, because I think I've heard your name in the industry before because you've been around in some pretty big companies, but I heard about you recently in relation to Max Space.
That's right.
Um, so perhaps could we start? Let's jump straight in. Tell me and my listeners what is Max Space and how you became president.
Sure. So MaxSpace is it's a newly announced company, but it actually has some pretty good, strong industry background in and of itself. So MaxSpace was founded by Aaron and Maxim, who have industry experience of their own. Aaron is one of the founders of Made in Space, which was acquired by Redwire. And then Maxim has worked on the space expandables, the soft goods structures that are already in orbit today, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. He's consulted on others, and he's built several other sort of inflatable architectures. So he has this very visionary approach, and he wanted to partner with Aaron, and that's what made MaxSpace. So MaxSpace is going to be working in the space industry to provide more volume at a more affordable rate. So when you think about sending up these traditional modules, the traditional structures, which are made of metals or composites or whatever you want to dream up, you have to fly them as they are. And that takes up a lot of space in a rocket, and that requires a lot of launches. And I think if you go back and look at the ISS architecture, it took about 60 launches, I think, which is incredibly expensive to get all of those modules in space. Whereas with MaxSpace, you can take a soft good structure and really compact it down quite a bit and then be able to launch that for a much more affordable rate. And to do more of that, you can get more volume in orbit more quickly. So that is what we think our unique value to the industry is to help expand the volume that's available in space and to do that much more quickly. And then as an added benefit, these are actually safer than the metallic structures because they're basically like a Kevlar type structure. So you get all of that resilience that you get with a Kevlar vest and the impact resilience that those offer. So it's safer, it is more compact, and I do believe we can manufacture these also more quickly than a traditional module. So we have a lot of benefits to offer the industry. And as far as how I came to be president of it, I just had this unique opportunity. I got reached out to, and Maxim and Aaron are two very different types of people. They come at this from a very different background. Aaron is more of the entrepreneur, and Maxim, if you've done any reading about him, I joked on LinkedIn recently that he's like he can compete for the most interesting man on earth easily because he does all of this survivalist type stuff. He paraglides and he climbs mountains that people haven't climbed before. He's just an amazing person. And he's also this person that develops space inflatable architecture, which is just, it's amazing. So it's so neat to join a company where you're bringing together this visionary engineering adventurous approach with this entrepreneurial approach and being able to be in early and help them shape that from this business perspective that I bring was very interesting to me.
Fascinating. And so I sort of imagine these I mean, in the UK, we call them bouncy castles. In America, it's
Yeah,
bounce houses. So I sort
yeah.
of imagine them like that, where you kind of have some sort of motor that kicks in and
Mm,
pumps it up. Obviously, space is a vacuum. So how does it inflate? Is there more? I assume there's more kind of structure to it to help it expand into its full shape.
I mean, you're not super wrong. There is, when we fly the Alpha 20 in 2026, which is our first module, we're going to be working with pressurized air. That is currently the philosophy. So we'll fly up an air tank, and that will be what helps the module expand when it's on orbit. Maxim's got a module in his office that I forget how long it has been inflated, but it's years, like maybe 15 years, and it's maintaining its pressure very well. So of course that would be the expectation for our modules. If you put humans in that changes things, because they're going to breathe in the oxygen, and you're going to have to replenish or have a regen ecosystem of some sort that kind of keeps that human rated atmosphere correct. But the pressure itself should maintain very well. So we're excited about that type of architecture.
Sure. And you
Yeah.
mentioned your first max space habitat is set to fly in 2026, which
That's right.
does it kind of sounds really far away, but actually, I mean, we're halfway through 2024. It's like
Right.
18 months now or something.
Yeah.
Tell me about the mission. And it's I think it's been made public, you're flying with SpaceX. Obviously, it sort of makes sense with the reusability and cost perspective. What are the key milestones in getting to that launch date from now through till launch?
Yeah, so Maxim's really the expert on all of the key milestones, but we do have a number of tests that we'll go through. The standard ones that you see other module providers going through, the burst test and things like that. So we'll step through all of those tests, and then we'll get to an integration timeline that we work with SpaceX and deliver things on time, which is usually well ahead of the launch. We hope to also be doing a little bit of coordination with NASA at Marshall Space Flight Center. They have sort of some subject matter experts in the soft good industry that should be advising us, we hope, on types of things that we should be doing or thinking about, not just for Alpha 20, because Alpha 20 is sort of ours. But as we move forward, if we're going to be coordinating with other human spaceflight organizations and things like that, what are the types of instrumentation that we need? What are the types of tests that we need to go through, just to be sure that we're clicking all the boxes and checking all the boxes as we go through this. But thankfully, NASA, when they put out the CLD requirements, they already put in requirements for soft good architecture. So this isn't like a complete unknown. There are already requirements out there for how to test and rate a module. So we would just be doing things to make sure that we are being thoughtful. And if people have other ideas about tests that maybe need to be done, that we can talk to them about how valuable is that, or is that just something that somebody wants to see how it does, that kind of thing. So lots of coordination before we fly, and then also just making sure that we're integrating well with all of the other systems providers that we'll need, things like lighting and cameras, and getting down data from the module, making sure all of that operates correctly. So it'll be a test case for us. It'll be a chance to show that Max Space, as this company, has the ability to fly these modules, and that we can successfully integrate these systems that people will be interested in having inside of our modules.
Absolutely. You've mentioned a couple of times that sort of soft good. I was just trying to think, what does that mean? Is that opposed to sort of hard good? So it's like a payload thing? Is that literally what it means? It's sort of a soft structure which goes in a payload?
Well, the soft structure just means that it's not made of metal or not made of composite, so it is soft. So that is the inflatable or the expandable type architecture, is the soft goods architecture. So if you look at the NASA requirements, which I referenced before, it talks about soft goods architectures. But I think they also use the term inflatables as well. They sort of use them interchangeably.
Yeah, amazing. So, I mean, can I sort of infer from all this that Max Space has this sort of vision of the future of space habitation being in these sort of structures in low Earth orbit and on the moon and Mars? Is that kind of a sort of longer term plan?
Absolutely.
How,
if you sorry, just to interrupt, but if you look at the NASA architecture for the Artemis missions, they talk about potentially having an inflatable structure on the moon. That's kind of what they were thinking about from a base standpoint. Doesn't mean that that's what it has to be, but there's been some work already put into thinking about maybe having an inflatable base there.
That's so cool. Have you sort of thought about the psychology of astronauts being in a soft structure? Because you think of scenes like in The Martian where there's kind of that, it's not really a spoiler alert, but blowout in the room where he's trying to grow potatoes, and it seems more dramatic when it's not a sort of metal walls. Is that just a psychological thing? Because as you said, it is arguably safer. And how do you get around that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I think most of the engineers or the astronauts that I have met and worked with are engineers or have some sort of technical background, and they do like to sit down and ask questions and make sure that they have a comfort level. And I think that's exactly what you would do in a situation like that, is sit down and explain the architecture, explain the tests that we've been through, the results of those, how they compare to a traditional metallic or composite type structure, and just walk through like, this is why it's safer, it's actually better for you, here are all the reasons why. And I think most of the astronauts would just latch right onto that.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
forgetting these are smart people as opposed to people
Yeah.
like me that just go, is this safer?
Well, it is interesting though. I think if you were talking about, opening a space hotel tomorrow, where
Mm,
we haven't had a lot of, um, regular people going to space yet, quote unquote. And so if you were to open that up tomorrow, you'd probably have some work to do. But I do think as you have heritage and it just becomes part of other programs, that when we look back on this in 20 or 30 years, nobody's going to question going up and spending a week in an inflatable architecture. They're just going to be like, that's what you do. That's what is up there.
and how I totally see how the potential huge increase in volume you can get from having an expandable structure, but how big could you go? You sort of, is your limitations, if it once it's folded up, it can fit in a SpaceX rocket, and if they can, if you could eventually go on Starship, could you launch something bigger? Is it as simple as that? Like, if you can fit it in the payload, it can go as big as you can, really.
It's as simple as that. So Maxim has worked through all the math that I will not be able to explain, and probably your listeners aren't really all that curious about, but it's a pretty simple, I say simple, I don't know if that's true, but it's a simplistic set of calculations to scale up. So we can take our 20-meter cubed module and just continue to scale it up. It's unlimited how much you can scale it up. And as you said, the real limitation becomes the rocket. How much can the rocket fit into it? And at that point, that's it.
Mm.
That's the limit. So yeah, you got it exactly right. We like to say it's unlimited, really. You can just keep going, stadium sized. If you can
Gosh,
imagine that,
yeah.
can you imagine having like a
One day.
stadium floating around the Earth? That would
One
be a
day.
lot of volume, a lot of space to live and work, a lot of things that could be done inside of that. So that would be really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're relatively new there, right?
Yes, I just started in June. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You see, we're getting in quickly. So you've had a really interesting career before, obviously. I
Thanks.
was thinking maybe we could touch on your experience at Axiom Space. I
Okay.
appreciate you're probably under some sort of, can't talk about this for a certain period of time, so don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to say any secrets. But
Okay.
Axiom seems to be smashing a lot of barriers at the moment, and certainly one of the leaders in everything from spacesuits to obviously putting astronauts into space. So how did your experience at Axiom sort of shape who you are as a space technology entrepreneur? What were your key takeaways from your time there?
Yeah, so I enjoyed my time at Axiom, and as I was leaving, and I was talking to Seth, who is the CEO of Axiom Space. His name's Michael Seppardini, for those who don't know, but everybody who knows him calls him Seth. So I'm going to refer to him as Seth. I was telling him that, like, there's no better job description that I could have written for myself than the one that I had at Axiom, because as you were probably going through my history, you saw that I was a flight controller on the space station and space shuttle program. So I worked at NASA's Johnson Space Center for human spaceflight for about 6 years, working the missions to space with astronauts. So I understood how spaceflight missions work. I understand how to send people to space. I understand working with NASA and with the international partners. And then fast forward a few years, I worked at Pratt & Whitney, which is part of Raytheon. It's a major defense contractor here in the United States, but also kind of worldwide. And I worked with 22 international air forces plus the United States Air Force. So I was negotiating contracts with those air forces. I was supporting those customers and managing a very large P&L, or profit and loss. So I had this business management experience, negotiation experience working with customers, and then marrying that with my spaceflight experience. That was kind of my role at Axiom. You put those two things together, and that's what I was doing there. So it was really neat. I mean, I just couldn't have, like I said, dreamt up a better job than the one that I had at Axiom, one that was more fitting for my background and my experience and the things that I like to do. I like to tell people, like, when I first started at Pratt & Whitney, I could not have told you that I would have liked working with customers, but it turned out that that was something that I really loved doing. And then to be able to, like I said, to bring that back into my space experience, which is something I grew up wanting to be part of. I'm one of those people who grew up always wanting to be part of the space program. So just to be able to do that, it was definitely like this career pinnacle is what it felt like. But then to be able to advance on and go on to Max Space and be president is another career pinnacle, I think, as well. So it's neat to see how that has prepared me to take on to work at Max Space and be able to help guide them. Axiom they are a leader. They were the first ones to go out there and pitch to NASA about a space station, and they've got the space suits program and things like that. But there are lessons I've learned, both good and bad, from them that I can carry forward to Max Space and say, okay, yeah, here are other ways that people are doing these things, or hey, here's some things that we can learn from and do maybe a little bit better. And that's actually true of all my experiences, just be able to look back at this breadth of experience that I have and say, okay, here's maybe what works and here's maybe what doesn't work, and use that to help guide the growth of this company.
Fantastic. I'm sure you've got many pinnacles to come, many more peaks in your career, awesome. For sure. And as part of that, raising money was a key part of your work at Axiom. I'm sure it still is. It always is if you're a sort of have a leadership position in the aerospace world. How do you think that sort of changed as I don't like to talk about COVID or anything like that, but kind of, macro world conditions and, how do you think it's easier to raise money for space companies at the moment, space technology companies, or is it harder, or is it different challenges? What's it like in 2024 if you're trying to raise money for a new mission or something?
I think it's a little bit harder. That's my own perception, and I'm sure other people could agree or disagree from their own experience, but I think it's a little bit harder. I think some of the space investors, or just investors in general, are becoming a little bit more wary. There's been a lot of different financial situations. You mentioned COVID, but there's also been the SPACs and things like that, and it's got people looking at the market and trying to assess, well, where's really the best place to get in? Where will I see the best return on my money? But you'll also listen to other experts in the field who will say things, and I think this is also true, that space investors are different than typical investors. Space investors probably are like the me's and probably the you's of the world, where we grew up caring about space. And so they just care about this as an industry, and they look at it differently because of that, not necessarily from the same investment cues as other industries that you would look at. So it's interesting. I think you have this balance. You have these investors who are going to invest no matter what because they just care about space. It's something that's interesting to them and they want to follow along and be part of. There are other areas of maybe the market where people are like, I'm not going to invest in space so much right now. I'd like to see something actually become more profitable than we're maybe currently seeing. I think you've got a mix. It depends on who you're talking to, really.
And I guess it's the timelines involved in the space industry, which is that you have to have those, I guess, very patient investors and deep pocketed, obviously, because most VCs will want to see a return in 10, 12 years, whereas space could be multi-decade, I guess.
That's right. That's right. It's definitely a different timing for this industry. But again, I think people who are investing understand that part of it. They understand that it takes a lot of money too. It's not just like investing in an app or something like that where you can throw in a little bit of money and see a huge return in a few years. I get that it's different. But yeah, I think there is a little bit more of the investor pipeline looking to figure out where are really, like, is there anything that's a little bit shorter term? That's just my perception though. And I don't think there will be. I don't think that space works like that. So it's always going to be a longer term.
Well, I guess
investments.
the good another tick for MaxSpace is obviously your focus on reusability,
Yep.
and I think a lot of investors, that's something that they'll look for, even if it's in space. So how does MaxSpace sort of plan to address the environmental impact of its operations and contribute to sustainable space exploration? Obviously, you're using SpaceX, which is a great start because you're reusing the
Yeah.
rocket. Is the
hmm
plan to reuse the modules as well? And are there other things that are going on with that sort of sustainability in mind?
Well, I actually want to jump back to the previous discussion just a little bit before we get into that and just say, I think from an investor perspective, we should be a very attractive company to look at, because if I can save a company a lot of money to get their modules in space, then it should shorten the time to return on investment in that company or that thing that you're trying to do in space. So MaxSpace can actually help the space economy by driving it to become something that is more profitable sooner. So hopefully that's something that we help the entire industry with. That's our goal. So as far as the sustainability aspect, it's a good question. I think this is something that the industry is struggling with as a whole. Of course, we've got debris issues. I think that's something, for example, that MaxSpace would probably help with in a number of different ways. Perhaps we become something that can help clean up, because you can store so much debris in such a compact volume when you launch it. There are things like that perhaps we can do. And then being able to use a module for multiple different applications, because it's so large and it perhaps takes less launches. So there are things that just inherent to our company and our business model that I think improves the sustainability and the impact to the environment.
For sure. And I think it just dawned on me, max space is such a great name as well, because you're maximizing space within the
That's right.
structures. So
You got it.
it says it on the tin, which is great.
Yeah.
And we sort of mentioned SpaceX a few times, and they're always going to be involved, or a launch company is always going to be involved in any company
Right.
that's doing anything in space. What they've done with the sort of private-public partnership, use that as an example. What role do you think the public-private partnerships will play in the future of space exploration? Do you think there's, how will MaxSpace sort of work with private companies and governments? And is there a sort of strategy, or is it just sort of part of the new, the new space economy where everyone's sort of working together to try and understand this thing?
I do think it's more of that last part, and I think it is everybody working together to understand how we can all sort of, I don't know if this translates well across the ocean, but scratch each other's backs, help each other out, so that we're all meeting our own goals. And I think that's the beauty of space, really, is it has started off being started off maybe a strong term. It has become a place of international cooperation. And it would be neat to see that carried forward in all of the space economy, whether that's international government cooperation or international business cooperation, being able to see that. And I think even just, let's go back and talk about the Axioms or the Voyagers of space. They're very likely going to have a number of different end users on their platforms. It's not as though they're just going to have one. So you're already seeing that that's how these companies are going to be set up, where there's a lot of different end users all partnering together. And it's what helps the Voyagers or the Axioms be able to offer that as a business service. So I think that's what we're going to continue to see. And I do think it is going to have a lot of government investment of some sort. That's not true for every space business, but I think for the most part, I was just reading a report last week, and it escapes me who it was by, but it talked about how really the major investors in the space economy have actually been the governments. The governments are funding programs. So having the governments continue to put money into the programs, whether that's the United States government or the ESAs of the world or whoever's, that's going to continue to help the space economy grow. You'd just like to see that that's not the only investments. You'd like to see that it starts to transition into the hands of the true commercial entities, and that one day we're sort of living more of the Jetsons type world where there's, space truck stops and things like that in orbit or whatever you may have.
I hope we see that one day.
Yeah.
We've talked about how the habitats could be used, and storing space debris. That's another example I never thought of before. What what other examples are there of how a max space habitat could be used, other than sort of living and working in space? Is there any other sort of wacky ideas that you could reel off that have been talked about?
I think I would just run down our traditional list. It is, of course, the research is a big part. That is what a lot of people are interested in, is making sure that there's a successor to the ISS. So research is a big component. Becoming a manufacturing environment is also a big component. The ISS isn't able to really do that today because it's not set up to be a manufacturing environment, but we would like to see manufacturing in space. And of course, you've mentioned the human spaceflight component of that. That's another area. There's farming in space, so having big greenhouses, whether that's on the lunar surface or on the Martian surface, or even just around the world, could be another component of that. Those are the main uses, but there's potential for entertainment, of course, coming from the Axiom heritage. There's been talk about the Tom Cruise movie, and so I think that there's potential for film studios or reality TV studios or whatever at some point in orbit in the future. Maybe some sort of sports league. Can you imagine the Olympics in space at some point? Like, that's just maybe what happens next. Maybe there's the Summer and Winter Olympics and the Space Olympics. Who knows?
Well, I'm still reeling from England losing in the final of the Euros of the soccer. So maybe if we were in space, we'd have done slightly better, and some of those headers would have gone in.
Maybe.
You're also the Chief Revenue Officer of the Cosmic Girls Foundation, which is an awesome name. Can you tell me more about its mission and your role there?
Sure. So I joined them in May of this year, so also very new, but the Cosmic Girls Foundation at the top level is seeking to get more girls involved in STEM. So looking at the statistics in the US, I don't think these are global, but they're probably pretty similar in England and in Europe. Women account for more than 50% of the graduates from college, but only about 20 to 30%, depending on the exact industry that you're looking at, of the STEM fields. So 20 to 30%. That's not great. And then you look at the leadership functions and you go realize, well, they're not even represented at 30% or even 20%. So trying to figure out, how do you fill the pipeline earlier, get girls interested earlier in space and technology careers so that they want to be part of that career field. They'll go to college for those degrees, they'll graduate, and they'll go into the workforce, and make sure that we're more balanced and it's more diverse. Because when we have diverse teams, you make better decisions at the end of the day, and there's lots of studies that will prove that out. So the Cosmic Girls Foundation is really seeking to make a big impact and get girls super excited about careers in space. And so the idea is this sort of audacious goal of getting 6 girls, one from each continent, and training them to be astronauts and selecting one of them to go on a suborbital flight. So that is sort of I don't want to say the first, but it's a big step for them and for us to get a girl onto a suborbital flight and be able to talk to girls about how anybody can do this. This isn't, we talk about being a rocket scientist. Anybody can do this. And you don't have to be an astronaut, but you can go on to so many different career fields within the STEM field itself. So we are looking, I'll just toss it out there, we're looking for donors and for partners. So if anybody's interested in that, feel free to go out to cosmicgirls.org and look at the donation button there and help us out and help us fund a girl into space.
That's so cool. And obviously, having yourself as president is and of Max Space as well is a tangible example where there's definitely more of them, those examples that are going to help that cause. And obviously, I'm sure you agree that the Artemis program is going to really help sort of spotlight sending the first female to the moon and first person of color as well. What are some of the key initiatives or programs that Cosmic Girls is thinking of in the future? And do you think there's maybe a way of sort of linking it to Max Space in some way? I'm sure you've thought about that, sort of starting them both at the same time, basically.
Yeah, it'd be great to be able to link them up at some point. Yeah, so the first thing that they have really kicked off is there is a forum that they are asking girls of this target age to join. That is a place for them to sort of ask each other questions or ask the moderators questions. And of course, we hope to get in a lot of people from industry to talk to the girls and to answer some more of their questions to help them feel connected to the industry in ways that they wouldn't otherwise feel connected. That's a really great feature that they've already kicked off. And then I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do some webinars and other events and more structured like training courses for all of the girls, that it's not just one girl from each continent that's being selected for this opportunity, which is a big opportunity, and I think it's a great goal as well. But sort of build backwards from there and round out the training and the experience that other people can also get involved in.
That's really cool. What I know I asked this a lot for anyone listening, but what advice would you give to someone looking to start their career in the space industry? You know, you've been a NASA flight controller and leadership at Axiom. Like, you've had some really cool jobs. Like,
Yeah.
People listening, what can they do to position themselves to have a fun career in the industry? What would you recommend?
So I think one of the main things I would recommend is something that I didn't have when I was graduating from college, but is to try to get out and do some informational interviews with people that are in the industry. And I think if you approach it correctly on LinkedIn, where you're not trying to ask for a job necessarily, you're not trying to suck up a lot of a person's time, but if you just reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing, and I wonder if you would give me 15 or 20 minutes of your time. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are going to say yes. And then just by having that exposure, you're going to learn a lot more about the career field and where your own skills and interests might best fit. So one of the things that I didn't know when I graduated from college is that there was something called project management or even program management. I had no idea that that was like a career field that I could use my aerospace engineering degree to go into. And then if you look back at my complete career history, that's exactly what I did. Is I sort of lucked into a job as a project manager at an Air Force base, and from there, that's where my career got shaped. And I love that. That fits my personality of being able to get everybody together, to be efficient, to get things done, to get it done for the customer, to be done on time. And if I just had one conversation with somebody back in my college days, I could have targeted that. Instead, I lucked into it, which is great. But that's the advice I would give people, is to kind of have an awareness of where are your skills, what personally works for you, and then go out and have lots of conversations with people and start to figure out where your values align with certain companies or organizations or roles, and go after those a little bit harder then, because you've sort of whittled it down and now you know exactly what it is that you want to do. And it's a lot easier to focus your efforts on that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great bit of advice. Not necessarily a informational interview, which is in itself is a great idea, but just don't be afraid. Like, always ask. Like, if you're at a networking event, go and say hi. If you can go on people's websites and their contact email is probably there. You can write them a note. Just say, I like what you're doing in this. I read about you in a news article. And people will respond. So I think that's the best bit of advice. Just be curious and not be ashamed. Not be embarrassed or
Don't be
overthink
embarrassed.
things.
Yeah. And again, not everybody is going to respond to you, and that's okay. That's not a big deal. So take the wins, the ones that do respond to you, those are wins. Take them and run with them.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're coming to the end of our chat, but it's been so great. I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on the vision for the space industry. You're in a leadership position, and I'm sure you're excited by the future, obviously, of the space industry. Where do you think it's going? Where do you think we're going to be in sort of 10 years time as a community? Where do you think we're going to be in space? Do you think we're going to be on the moon? Do you think there's going to be some huge breakthrough in AI that's going to kind of, change how we do science and explore and all of the above?
I do think AI may change the direction of all industries. And so it may make this a really hard prediction to nail down. But I do think we'll be on the moon. I do think we will be living, working, researching on the moon, hopefully on our way to Mars or maybe there. But I think we'll be on the moon and working towards Mars. And I think we will have also more opportunities for people to live and work in space in ways that are much more attainable for the general person, maybe not everybody, but much more attainable for the general person to say, oh yeah, I'm doing my semester abroad in space and I'll be back in the fall or something. I think that's where we'll be in 10 years. That's what I hope Max Space helps the industry get to by lowering the cost and making it just much more attainable for the industry. And then from there, it expands out to the people.
That's so cool. And just a final question on Max Space and their immediate plans. Is there anything, other than the launch in 2026, is there anything that you're sort of working on that's going to push the needle in terms of progress, or anything that you can sort of say that you're focusing on? It's okay if not, because that's a pretty big target already.
There's a lot I can't talk about, but I will highlight right now that we have a couple of smaller contracts with the Department of Defense that we're working on right now. We hope to get the next phase with those. We also have another one that's not a Department of Defense that hopefully we can announce soon. So if you're not already following Max Space on social media, do that so that you can follow along with our journey.
Fantastic. And I'll read those out in the outro as well, so people know how to follow you. Well, look, Kirsten, it's been great to chat. Best of luck with your 2 relatively new positions, and I'm sure maybe I'll have you on in 2026 if I'm still doing the podcast, which I hope I am.
That would be
and we
great.
can talk about how well the mission went. Thank you very much.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Ben.